Welcome to Taking the Tradition On. It's back! Hurrah! I'm so pleased to be back doing Taking the Tradition On. So summer is a distant memory. Autumn is here. Yes, we are both here with our crammed bookcases. Obviously, that's what we sit and do before taking the tradition on, is just hold up books at each other and go, have you got this one? and they're all talking about their own books now while I witter on. But right, you're going to have to start listening now, because I'm going to introduce Daniel properly. So I think you all know who my fabulous guest is tonight, because that is why you're here. I have the completely marvellous Daniel Morden, who is, of course, a storyteller from Wales, a Welsh storyteller, born in Wales, raised in Wales. And that is what this series of Taking the Tradition On is going to be about. I started this series particularly looking at where I've come from in storytelling and talking about Duncan Williamson, who was my great mentor. And we've looked a lot about Scottish travellers and why Duncan was so important. But now I want to open that out. And so this series is going to be about places and storytelling, and interviewing and talking to storytellers from different places, mostly different countries. But do you know what? Places within the same country can be so different. I'm not, if I make any rules, you know, I'll just break them. So, but we're starting off with Wales. And it's interesting because I live really close to Wales. Daniel and I are actually about the same distance away from Hereford. And we're both quite close. I think you're about 40 minutes away, Daniel?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm maybe 50 minutes, an hour away from Hereford, and neither of us go there. It's a very nice place, but we just don't go because of where you look and that relationship with the land that you're on, and which kind of we were talking about which kind of direction you face in. And I'm very close to the border, but where I live is definitely England. And you're very close to the border as well, but you definitely live in Wales.
Yeah, I definitely live in Wales, but it's a very English part of Wales. I mean, it was invaded and was England for a very long time. It's probably one of the most English parts of Wales.
What gives your, so it's Abergavenny where you live. What makes Abergavenny Abergavenny? What are the just few things about it that really identify it as a place?
Well, we're right next to the Black Mountains. So wherever you look in Abergavenny, you can probably see a hill looming above the buildings. And that's one of the defining qualities of Abergavenny. Another is that it's a border town. So the motto is, those who were strangers are now friends. So we, if you travel west, you're up in the South Wales valleys, you're in the mining valleys. If you travel east, you're over to Hereford. North, you go into Powys very quickly, about 5 to 10 minutes, you're in Powys. If you travel south, you go down to Newport. So each of those different areas have very strong cultural identities, very strong cultural influences. So when we have a food festival, and Martin Parr, the photographer, the documentary photographer, was resident photographer one time for the food festival, and he did a poster of the food of Abergavenny, and it was like, one shot was of a plate with kind of nouvelle cuisine on it, very beautifully arranged, you know, a sprig of broccoli and delicious food. And then next to it, there was a photo of the market stall selling out-of-date jammy Dodgers. And we kind of, those kind of different cultures coexist in Abergavenny because we're a border town. So you got the county set, who all vote Conservative, so we always have a Conservative MP here. But you've also got the Valley's influence as well. So the lads coming down on a Friday and Saturday night for a night out and the dust up. And those kind of different communities coexist.
Mm. We have some of those aspects. I love your motto. I absolutely love your motto. I mean, I think relationships across the board have got better where I am, but there's
Yeah.
still kind of a lingering thing. It's certainly part of our history, that thing of kind of, you know, not having a clock face on the west side of the church, because the English wouldn't even give the Welsh the time of day, you know, which is just really horrible. But kind of what I do think maybe is similar is that these border countries, is because the border's so close and because there's been so much competition, that it really makes you focus on the land where you are, and people are looking for those things, that this is us. These are the stories that us. And I found that there's a lots of stories in all of those places, because you constantly have to express and define who you are.
Yeah. It's a bit of a whirlpool, that one, and I always struggle to get dragged into it. I'm always very reluctant to have long conversations about Welshness, and there are always opportunities to have, you know, what does it mean to be Welsh? And I'm like, oh, but nevertheless, I have those conversations with myself rather than publicly. So I would agree with you. I think because we live on a border. I mean, there was a film of On the Black Hill a few years ago now, probably 25 years ago. Whenever I look back and think about something, it's generally 25 years ago. Anyway, the film starts with a shot of a glider, and it's shot from above. So you can see the glider moving over the landscape. And the glider moves over these mountains, these sort of like the folds of a brain, with shadows passing over them of the clouds. And there's a caption that says Wales. And the camera follows the glider as it moves just a little bit further, and the landscape gets flat and verdant and agricultural, farmed land, and it says England. And I always feel like we're two halves of the same brain where we are here. You know, that there's the Welsh side where it's all a bit wilder and stranger, and then the English side where it all goes flat. And I think about King Herla as well, you know, the Marcher king who rides up and down the marches trying to, well, he's not allowed to get off his horse. You know that story, Amy?
Well, vaguely. Remind me.
Well, it's one of those stories, it's a bit like Rip Van Winkle or something like that, The Legend of the Seven Sleepers, where someone goes into a cave and they think they're only in the cave for a night. And when they emerge, 400 years have gone by and everything they knew was just a memory. And Herla learns that if he gets off, he rides into the cave, gets off the cave, gets off the horse, has a feast, emerges out the cave on his horse, and he learns that if he gets off his horse, he'll turn to dust. So he and his men ride up and down the marches. And that's a story about entering another world without knowing it. And I always feel like that is very relevant to living on the border.
Definitely. And we have Edric. He rides up and down the march in the border in a very similar way, but he is allowed to get off. And I wonder just how closely those ones were. So he can get off, but when he does, he's back underneath the hill where he has to wait until the true king of England, because it's his fault for letting the Normans in.
All right.
Yeah, partly, which is a long story. But I suppose, I mean, that's what I was getting at, really. Not about those endless debates of what it is to be Welsh and what it is to be English, and kind of, but more kind of, because those questions are around, I think they're places that the old stories are remembered and retold.
Yeah.
That those stories are maybe a little bit closer to the surface, whereas maybe further into Wales and into England, you might have to dig a little bit harder for them. They're stories that are being told to reinforce the land, and they're kind of the people in the stories are very layered against each other. And I wondered if that was the same in Abergavenny, and kind of what the flavour of those stories are. Those, which I'm assuming, I could be wrong, that I'm assuming they're the first stories you heard. That I might be totally wrong. Maybe the first stories were Grimm's at school. I don't know.
Well, no, they weren't Grimm's. The first stories I ran across were from books, and I got a whole series of puffin books by Roger Lancelyn Green, and it was Myths of the Norsemen and Tales of the Greek Heroes, and then he wrote Tales of Troy as well. It's over there.
That bottom shelf. That went.
So they were the first ones I encountered, and I remember my parents buying me Kevin Crossley Holland's Norse Myth when I was about 11, and there's a moment in it. Well, there isn't a moment. It's a description. Odin has a raven on each shoulder, and one is called Hugin, and the other is called Munin. Forgive my pronunciation, please, Casper. One of them, the name means thought, and the other one, the name means memory. And I remember at the age of 11 thinking, that's a riddle, and I don't understand the answer to the riddle. Why is one called thought and the other called memory? And I'm still intrigued by that image. I'm still curious about that image even now. So it was the Norse myths and the Greek myths, which arguably are the central stories of European culture. The Welsh ones came much later. We had things like
the next question.
Blooming Beth Gellert. Oh, what? The next question, is that what you said?
I was going to say that was going to be the next one. When did the Welsh legends come in?
Well,
I have to admit, I heard Beth Gellert and it put me off Welsh folklore for a very long time.
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone. I was in the States. I went to the Smithsonian Festival one year, and I did a live broadcast. And they asked me, give us one of the central stories of Wales. So in synopsis, obviously, because we were on the radio, I told them Beth Gellert, and I said, I tell you what, that'll make a great country and western song. And I said it as a joke, and the switchboard lit up with people citing titles of songs which told the story of Beth Gellert, country songs and bluegrass songs, which told the story of Beth Gellert. So Beth Gellert was fairly early on. Some primary school teacher told it to me. I didn't really encounter the Mabinogi until much later. We didn't really get much of that till much later. But I also remember I grew up in Cwmbran, which is a new town. But beside it is Caerleon. And Caerleon is one of the sites where King Arthur is reputed to be sleeping under a hill. And my dad, he was driving the car one time, and we made our way over Catsash Hill, and he said, King Arthur's under here. King Arthur's fast asleep in a cave. And one day when Wales is in danger, the ground will shake, a bell in the cave will ring, and King Arthur and all his knights will emerge to save Wales from danger. And that hill, even now, is I suppose the word is numinous, is sort of magical and strange. Every time I drive over it, I have a sort of little frisson. So that was an example of a story that my dad told us that changed that place, changed that landscape. Caerleon is also where Arthur Machen lived, who wrote a whole series of deeply weird and creepy and disturbing novels that I wouldn't recommend. And they're all about this sense that just under the surface of the landscape, there is another race of beings. There is another kind of world which we don't understand, and you meddle with at your peril. So over and over again, there was this sense that the landscape was just hiding something else. And that's what I've been trying to do in my work. telling Welsh stories, particularly in schools, is to try and restore that sense of Wales as a deeply weird place where odd things tend to happen. I like the idea of freaking out kids, so when they pass a wood, they wonder if there's a booker in it. And if they catch something in the corner of their eye and they turn their look and they can't tell what it is, they immediately remember the story I told them in school about the spirit of the woods that's called the booker.
I love that, and that's definitely how I feel about this land and Wales in particular, and all of the borderlands. And I'm interested kind of when that started with the mentoring, because when you talk about that and your work in Wales, I know that we kind of had, you were a little bit ahead of me, but we were sort of mentoring at the same time. And then I actually mentored with you for a little while.
Yeah.
People know about, obviously I've talked about a lot about studying with Duncan and Duncan being my mentor. But I was really lucky. I got to do a whole year's apprenticeship. Yeah. And on that year's apprenticeship, I studied with lots and lots of different storytellers, and I rang lots of people. I'm like, can I come and tag round after you for a couple of days? And I had a fantastic couple of days with you. Wow. And I think I was one of the few people that had come into storytelling, and I think you probably were the same, that I started telling to adults. And I think at that time, most people had kind of come from telling to children. Yeah. And people assumed that if you could tell to adults, you could tell to children. Yeah. I didn't have a clue. Yeah. And I was sort of learning that process. And I spent a day with you in school, and we went in and I watched you kind of, you were telling Lazy Jack, and you just went straight up to the front of the first person, kind of, hello, I like to shake you by the foot, and grabbed this child's foot and sort of shook their foot. And it was like the whole class was just absolutely there. And you had them from that moment. But that working with you to go into the school that day, I was working on The Silver Ball, which was not a story that I would have thought about telling to children. And you kind of looked at the other stuff that I was thinking of telling, and yeah, it's okay. You were very nice, but it's kind of and I worked on that, and you were going, and I was like, I'm not sure I should tell this to children. And he said, no, that was the best thing you did all day. And because of that whole being on the edge of that, going into a different world, of making people uncomfortable, and the need that children have for that I think I had really veered away from before that. Everybody is agreeing with this. Yes, terrifying little people, and children basically being the terrifying little people, I think, really. But I don't know. Should we share what you sent me with everybody?
Yeah.
So this, talking about terrifying people. Let me see if I can find it. So we have known each other quite a long time, and you said everything's like 25 years ago. This is more than 25 years ago. This is what, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think we come out quite well out of that one.
Well, just
I don't know what face that boy's making at Hugh.
Just for the sake of any confusion, folks, I'm the one in the mustard jumper, because I look at this photo and I think, thank God I met my wife when I was a cat.
Well, but I think you still are, Daniel, and it's
bless you.
We all love you. We think you're amazing, and I remember you like you were then, and I thought you were fantastic then. But I mean, it's been great actually seeing you over the last 30 years and things that you've accomplished, and I thought you were a great storyteller then. But you used to do quite a lot of street entertaining and children's entertaining.
I did, yeah.
And what you tell now, you've still got all of those skills, but there is such much more depth and thought and knowledge that goes into those stories than, I mean, which you would hope after 30 years, we hope it's all going to carry on. They're being very nice. They're not laughing too hard.
Well, somebody said, who is who, in the question box, Amy.
Right.
So,
Okay. Shall we talk people for those of you who have
yeah,
not worked out who these people
yeah,
are? So
yeah.
this gentleman here with lots of hair and a drum is Ben Haggerty. And this is me. This is Hugh Lupton, and this is Daniel Morden. And it was
Really,
at
it
Kids
is really.
International. I remember it well. And we were in a tent at Kids International in 1992.
I think it was.
91.
Yeah,
No,
I think it was earlier than that. I think it was earlier than that. Yeah, so it was in Telford. And it was a lovely day, actually. It was. I'm pretty sure it was old Richard Walker who'd organised it and got us all there.
Yeah, it was.
And it was a smashing day. I mean, it rained and the tent flapped, but I remember it being very enjoyable. And I just wish those kind of kids internationally kind of things that. I mean, I love the festivals that exist at the moment, but I do like a nice kids session. I still do. I mean, it's lovely telling big, epic stories for grown-ups. I enjoy that, but there's something particularly at the moment I'm really missing. Getting a whole tent full of kids.
I don't know if there's many opportunities to tell with people now. I mean, I was very lucky to get to do a lot of those kind of gigs. At that age, I mean, I think, gosh, I was maybe 15, to be telling with you and Hugh and Ben, and to listen to you and to watch you working with the children, and to be able to bounce off stories and have to try and work out what would go with what you'd been telling. That was an amazing experience and a learning experience. Yeah. And no, it wasn't early 80s. I'm not quite that old.
No. It was late 80s or early 90s.
I think it might have been 89 or 90. I think I was 15, and I was born 75. So yeah, but I think I was about 15 then, maybe 16. But I mean, so though, I learned lots from all three of you, and I know kind of you learned a lot particularly from Hugh.
Yeah.
But from all of the Crick Crack Club, from Ben and Hugh and Pom.
Yeah.
But I don't think. I mean, I think it's been interesting because I don't think there were really any Welsh storytellers to learn from at that point.
It was just me and Eric Madden at that point. But then, thanks to Beyond the Border, very quickly a community grew, just like at Round Festival at the Edge. Community of storytellers grew in Shropshire. So in South Wales, a community grew around Beyond the Border. It happening at Santuit Major, just outside Cardiff. But initially, it was just me and Eric. And I went to university in London, and then I stayed in London for a little while trying to figure out what on earth to do. And at that point, I ran across storytelling, and I was running the Crick Crack Club with Ben for a while. And that was when I met Eric. It wasn't in Wales. I met Eric when he came down to London and did the Crick Crack Club. I met Mike Rust. I met, loads of folks who I've known ever since. But pretty quickly from Hugh, actually, I got this sense, if Hugh can live in deepest Norfolk and make a living as a storyteller, maybe I could go back to where I grew up and do it there. And that was a big thing for me, to see him, set that example, make that.
Just to actually realise it would be possible.
Yeah.
I think it's very brave, and kind of that whole thing of sort of setting up where there's just nothing happening and getting, I mean, it's exciting to get it going from nothing, but hard work. Peter's asking when did Beyond the Border start, and I'm trying to think when that would have been.
I think 92.
91.
Sorry?
Festival at the Edge was 91, and it was quite a while after that. So it wouldn't have been before 94, 95. Mid to late 90s.
Well, I think it must be 93. Someone's going to pop up in the box now, aren't they, and tell us what it was. 93. There you are. Someone's just said 93.
Oh, sorry, Chandrika.
93. There you go. So 93.
So, anyway, so so you were just there, sort of to be there in time for that. But And because we're going on to you doing mentoring now, but I would really like to know what the most important things you got from your mentors were.
Well,
that you're kind of maybe thinking about passing on now.
Well, the main one from Duncan was remains, no, I'm not saying was, is just how embracing he was, just how generous he was with his time and also with his stories. So there's this legend that you confirmed when we chatted before this meeting, that Duncan was at the Storytelling Festival in America, the National Storytelling Festival, Jonesboro, and they had signs up outside saying no recording of the stories, and Duncan wouldn't go on stage until they'd taken them all down. And Duncan was incredibly welcoming and generous with his time, but also with his stories. He was. Some of those books have to Daniel. He promised he would tell them, written inside, books from Duncan. And if you work on a story quite some time and then you tell it and immediately someone comes up and says, oh, that was great, can I tell it? There's a part of me that thinks, oh no, really? But I remember Duncan. And I always say yes. So one of the people I'm mentoring now, I was down at the George Hewitt Evans Centre. They have one of those events that they have, those lovely discussion events. And this guy sidled up and I thought about Duncan and I said, hello, my name's Daniel. And I shook his hand and I'm now mentoring him. And it was just one of those moments where you could go, you could go either way. Does this person want to be friendly to me or not? And I thought, let's not be a clique. Let's try and be as welcoming as we possibly can in this situation, because a lot of the people in the room did know one another and I didn't know if this lad knew anyone at all. And that definitely comes from Duncan. I often think of Duncan and just how generous he was. And also he was so fantastic one-to-one. A lot of people found it uncomfortable when he took their hand and sang him a song. But me, I flipping loved it. I mean, it was incredible. Absolutely incredible.
You had to, that's the thing. I mean, it's kind of, we've been talking all this time about the border, in lots of ways that is between us, about the Welsh border. Duncan was fantastic at knocking those borders down. That he was surrounded by borders. I mean, Scottish travellers on some of them, certainly when he was growing up, with some of the most discriminated people against that there are, and he would just barge through all of those. And he knew that people found it difficult to cross them to come to him, and so he would just go straight to them. Yeah. And he had a way of looking around a room and working out who the one person that really needed to be brought in and some help was, and would just go and get them. And that is what storytelling is about. Go on.
Yeah, making a community. Well, I'm just reminded one night, one of the Beyond the Borders, Duncan sidled up to me during the day and said, we're going to have a bit of a ceilidh tonight. So we get in this room. And again, there was a bunch of people, a lot of whom didn't know one another, some of whom did. And Duncan kind of presided over this ceilidh. And you'll probably have had this experience. But I looked around the room and I thought, well, she's going to tell or sing. He's going to tell or sing. But I don't know about them. And Duncan got everyone to do something. He had a sort of incredible way, charm, and sort of gentle way of cajoling, persuading, convincing people that they had something, that they had a voice, they had something to say or sing. And it was a magical evening. And the next morning I saw him and he said, that was a great night last night, Daniel. And I said, yeah, it was a great night. It was a great night. And he said, and it's all thanks to me. And it was all thanks to him. Because
absolutely.
I mean,
And
the professional tellers would have told, but what made it incredible, what lifted it, was the people who didn't even know they were going to do anything, and then they did.
yeah, and just that it's a proper. It becomes not a performance. It's a real sharing,
Yeah.
and there's a heart level that comes at that point.
Yeah.
And it's like you were saying, that whole thing about kind of having your hand held and somebody looking into your eyes, or Duncan looking into your eyes in that way. It could be really creepy, but you have to. He will come all the way to you, but you also have to do a little bit of meeting at that point, and you have to let that wall drop and sink into it, and then it's amazing. And if you're somebody that can't do that, that wall is kind of like getting tighter and tighter and tighter, until eventually I think it does break. But if you can let go, and then you experience a story in a way that I don't think I ever had before, and it is quite an unusual experience. I haven't managed to do that to other people yet, very often.
Well,
I think that's a challenge that I need to maybe take on.
I've had some very well, one of my other mentors was Taffy, and 1991, I think it was, the Garden Festival was at Gateshead, and Taffy was the resident storyteller there. And I spent a day with him. I travelled up with him from Cannon Hill Park, where there'd been a festival. I travelled up with him overnight, and then I trailed around with him for the day so that I could apply to be the storyteller at the Garden Festival in Ebbw Vale, which is just up the road from here. And I got that job, and that day with Taffy was, was very instrumental in me getting that job. And getting that job was very instrumental in me feeling confident enough to settle back in Wales again. And Taffy is great one-on-one. And I did have moments where it was kind of akin to what Duncan had been doing. I remember sitting next to an elderly woman, very arthritic woman, kind of thin and bony and shriveled, and she was sitting on a park bench looking across the valley to all the pigeon lofts. And she said, "What are you then?" And I had a coat on which said Daniel Morden, teller of myths, legends, jokes, riddles, ghost stories, stop me and hear one. So I said, "Oh, well, I'm here to offer you a story." And she said, "Well, what kind?" And I showed her my back with the sign on, and she said, "Tell me a myth." So I told her a myth as we looked out across the valley towards the pigeon lofts. And she said, "Well, I can't tell you a myth, but I can tell you a joke." And I said, "Go on then, what is it?" And she said, "What's the difference between a collision and an explosion?" And I said, "I don't know. What's the difference between a collision and an explosion?" And she said, "In a collision, there you are. In an explosion, where are you?"
That's great.
Very Welsh. That's very Welsh, though. Very Welsh.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't think I've thought about this in these terms really before, but I think actually most of the defining moments in me learning something critical about storytelling have actually been one-on-one, of those moments when I've really kind of felt like I've touched the heart of something. Obviously lots of times with Duncan, but actually also moments kind of, oh God, standing outside a National Trust property in the rain waiting for it to open, thinking I'm supposed to be starting 5 minutes, I've been stood here for 40 minutes, I'm absolutely wet through and fed up. And meeting a couple of women who are going, just like you said, "Oh, what are you here for then?" "Oh, I'm going to be doing some storytelling today." "Oh, are you?" And instead of tell us a story, which is what I was expecting, they went, "My granny was a storyteller, and she used to tell us talking about terrifying the children." And it was a mother and a daughter, and I think the daughter was maybe 70 and the mother was kind of nearly 90, and so they were talking about the grandmother who was 110 and no longer with them. They were talking about this granny they'd come from Ireland. They were in, the National Trust place was near Liverpool, so they'd settled there, and she would wear an apron that was made out of Hessian sacking. And they'd all go over the road to the granny's house, and she'd put them in the bed. They'd be stopping there for the night, and she'd start telling the stories, and one by one they'd all run home as they all got absolutely terrified. And she told me one of the most disturbing, strange, surreal fairy stories that was about domestic violence, that was about, and magic, and just so many kind of in about 10 minutes standing there in the rain, and it blew me away. And I can tell you and remember everything about where things were, and that moment's just one of those moments that crystallized for me and I went, this is why I want to do what I want to do. And when we were talking about what we might do tonight, as usual, we haven't talked about most things we said we were going to talk about, which is always the way. But what you kept saying before was kind of, everything that I do is trying to find out more about what storytelling is and what it is that makes it tick and why it's so important. And it was really interesting. I think Kat Weatherall said to you, you're in the legacy phase of your
I'm
career.
in the legacy phase. I thought, oh, she's my friend.
And I love that. So, and it's true. So you are taking on mentors now. And I know I've talked to some of your mentors who are really excited to be working with you. And I'm really interested in what you're learning about storytelling by having to teach other people.
Well, I'm very late to the party with teaching. For a long time, I would say, oh, I'll teach a beginner's course. I'm very happy to teach a beginner's course. But I'm not really sure if I've got anything else to offer, because most of what I do is fairly instinctive. But having to teach, deciding that I would teach, because I'm in the legacy phase, has made me have to actually express in words my approaches and my kind of line on things. Up till then, I just always just did what I thought was the right thing to do. But suddenly there's people going, well, why? And I have to find a language, I have to find a terminology to describe it to another human being. And in the process of doing that, it's refining my own, I suppose, what the George Hewitt Evans Centre for Storytelling would call practice. It's refining my own, it's sharpening up how I go about preparing to tell a story. So I've just been teaching an online course, and on the final session, I asked participants to send in a story they'd like to work on. Of course, this is all on Zoom, so I'm not doing much sort of the practical walking and talking and gesturing and all those kind of things. Instead, it's much more kind of text-based, just because of the medium, just because of Zoom. So they're sending in stuff, stories, probably often from 19th century texts, and I'm looking at them in advance and saying, well, that part refers to a story that we're not going to hear, so you're going to have to replace that. And that part, well, let's face it, that's just downright offensive now. So how can we replace that section with something equivalent that doesn't put off your audience? And in the process, now that I'm looking at stories that I'd like to tell on a podcast or whatever, I'm finding I can do that quicker now. The sort of muscle has sharpened up. I can look at things and make decisions about them and understand why I'm making those decisions in a way that I couldn't before.
So why have you been telling stories for so long? What is it that has made it, we want it to be? I mean, 'cause it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy career. And you said you've been doing it for 30 years. What is that? Can you put into words what that driving force is, why you want to do what you do?
Well, it's back to Duncan. I mean, one of the things that Zoom performances have made me realize is that you said, Duncan made everyone welcome. And if you're in a show, in a room with people, what happens is the people, by and large, don't know one another. And as the evening goes on, it becomes a kind of community. Everybody inhales at the same time. Hopefully everybody laughs at the same time. And it becomes a kind of hive mind, becomes a kind of shared consciousness when it's working. And of course, on Zoom, you can't, there's this thing you're supposed to be able to do, which is read the room. Of course, there's literally and metaphorically no room on Zoom. Everybody's in different places. I mean, tonight, well, I shouldn't really even say tonight, should I? Because Caroline in Australia is probably the morning. And then we've got people in America, we've got people all over the world. So there is no room. And people aren't sitting shoulder to shoulder. They're not breathing the same air. They're probably in different time zones. Their bodies are at different stages of waking up and going to sleep. And that storytelling, you know, what is storytelling? Why do you do it? It's that sense, that lovely sense of a bunch of people sharing something, and just for a few moments, something bigger than me is happening. Something where we're sharing a moment. Alan Bennett, the English writer Alan Bennett, said, when you're touched by a poem or a song or a story from long ago, it's as if a hand has reached out of the darkness and taken your own, and you feel less alone. That's pretty early on into my storytelling career. I remember thinking, I want poignant. That's what I want in the storytellers I go and see. I like a good laugh. I watch a lot of stand-up. I'm fascinated by stand-up, but what really impresses me is if someone can do poignant. And that's because of this sense of feeling less alone. And the boundaries dropping, and a group of people who could be all over the world on Zoom are all feeling the same emotion or some very similar emotion momentarily. We are all sharing something, even though we're not inhaling the same air.
So this is going to test you even further with this. So there's Karen who's just saying, what does poignant mean? How would you describe that feeling?
Well, it's probably better to describe it through an image. So Hector, Prince of Troy, doesn't want to go and fight. His wife Andromache just had their son, Astyanax. But Hector's brother, Paris, has precipitated a disastrous war with Greece. And Hector's the eldest son of the king of Troy. And he can't not go and fight. He has to defend his city because he knows if the Greeks get in, the city will be sacked and everyone will be enslaved or killed. So he has to go and fight, even though he doesn't want to. And his wife, as he's walking down through the streets of the city, she says, don't go. Achilles is unstoppable. If you go up against Achilles, you will die. And he says, how can I not? How can I not go and fight? And their baby is in his wife's arms. And Hector takes the baby in his own and says, this is my fate. I have to go and do this. I have to. And then he leans down and he kisses the baby. And as he kisses the baby begins to cry. And his wife, Andromache, says, it's your helmet. Because you're wearing your helmet, he doesn't recognize you. And Hector hands the baby back, takes off his helmet, takes the baby in his arms, and the baby begins to gurgle and laugh when he recognizes his father. And Hector hands the baby back to his wife, puts the helmet on, and walks out to his death.
I think that's quite a good definition of poignant. So, and it's those moments that, for me, I think that's why one of the reasons I want to be a storyteller is because that's how I live I don't know how to explain lots of things apart from through story.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to
It's an
process
analogy, isn't it? It's an analogy, isn't it? And there are some things, there are some emotions, moods that are better expressed through music. You know, we're not wholly logical beings. There's another side to the brain, the side that dreams and shakes at shadows and can't quite shake off the sense that there's something in the woods. And that's where the stories come in. That's where the stories come in. Even though the government thinks that we have a job that is a dead end and that we're going to have to retrain, we're always going to need stories. We're always going to need stories.
I'm going to open this out a little bit because we're getting quite a few questions coming in from people. So I'm just, I'm not sure if it's Lisa or Liza. I think it's Lisa. So Lisa says, I'm really interested in where this conversation is going. I would like to ask both of you, how do you find the experience of live storytelling on Zoom, of an established piece that you've told to many live audience compares with a Zoom telling of the same piece? And given the current circumstances, would there be anything you would change about that telling on Zoom the next time? Or are you just accepting it for what it is in lieu of the real thing during COVID?
You want to have a jump at that, or shall I?
Well, you're the guest. I know what I'm going to say, but I'd be quite interested to hear what you're going to say.
Well, Rachel Rose Reid organised an event called Sofa Story Club. And she asked me and a writer to do a performance, you know, leapfrogging one another. You know, he did a bit, I did a bit, he did a bit. And that was one of the early Zoom ones that I did during lockdown. And as you described, you know, there's this sort of Muppet Show configuration on the screen of lots of little boxes with different people in their homes. And as the performance went on, it was on a Sunday night. And as the performance went on, it got dark in lots of those rooms. And eventually the only light was coming from the screens that they were looking at. And it became very intimate. It suddenly became more intimate than it would have been if I was in a theatre. These people were kind of curled around the screen. Some of them were in their pajamas in bed. I was looking into people's bedrooms, which is the most private space in the house. And it reminded me, the Welsh poet Gillian Clarke said, poems are private company. And it suddenly felt like that Zoom has the potential for being private company. There's one person, they wouldn't have got to a gig because perhaps they're not physically capable of showing up at a theatre. Perhaps they're housebound. And we, storytellers, we can be private company. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience of not being able to sleep and turning on the radio and listening to the World Service. But I have that kind of experience of private company when that happens to me, when I'm lying in bed in the dark, listening to a voice on the radio speaking, or sailing by, or the shipping forecast. And it suddenly felt like storytelling could be that for people. Live, you know, you could be looking into a screen, and on the other side of that screen, on the other side of the world, there's someone who's alone, who's having a good chuckle, or feeling as though they're part of a community. So it has potential, but we're all struggling and experimenting to find out what that potential is. Rachel was a splendid MC. She did a really great job of what she did was she got everyone to sing, even though we couldn't hear one another singing through Zoom. We couldn't hear one another singing. Everyone was singing anyway in their own houses. So you could see everyone's mouths going, even though you couldn't hear what they were necessarily hear what they were singing. And that did create a kind of, even if it was an illusion, it was a helpful illusion that we were a group, group. So how would I adjust the performance? Well, if I was doing a performance in a theatre, I'm aware of trying to reach the back of the hall. I'm aware of trying to reach, in some way or another, every member in the audience. Whereas if I'm just looking at a tiny little eye on the top of my laptop or on my phone, the performance can become much more intimate. I'm not so concerned about projection or about actually not so concerned about gesture. I'm more concerned about facial expression and the undulations of the voice, because there is an intimacy that comes with it.
I'm just looking at some of the comments, and people are agreeing, saying, you know, Lynn saying, I feel that I have, and I'm being spoken to in a good way. And yeah, much love for Rachel Rose Reid as well. Tim saying,
oh yeah,
she's exquisite in the way she holds space, and I totally agree with that. She's if you don't know Rachel Rose Reid, then look out for her, because she's a fantastic storyteller, but she is somebody who holds space really beautifully. And I mean, for me, I don't see this as being in lieu of storytelling, and in lieu of a live space. I think it's really exciting. I think there is that thing if we don't know what it is yet, and I think it's great. There's no rules. I love the thing that there's no rules, that there isn't an established way of doing things, so we can play. It's this whole new pioneering space that we can try things out, and everybody's doing that. So it doesn't matter if we completely make a mess and balls the whole thing up, because we're all doing that, and like people will laugh and be very generous and very forgiving, and I've learned so much during this time. And I'd started on that journey before lockdown happened. So I mean, for me, I kind of was doing a little bit of, you know, and I know you had as well, you were better than me, but I kind of felt like I was like paddling in the waters and having a little go, and then all of a sudden it was kind of like the whole world jumped into the water with me, and kind of like, it's like, wow.
I mean,
I know I live in a very rural place, you know, I have children, I don't get to go out to live storytelling. I love going to gigs and festivals, they're wonderful, but you know, when I was breastfeeding my kids at 3 o'clock in the morning, I ended up watching Star Trek, because that's what was on, and that was all that was on. And if I could have been listening to stories in the States, and going to evening concerts there, that would have been amazing for me. I mean, that would have been such a fantastic connection, and just and there's so many reasons I think that you can be made to feel outside of a community. Like you were saying, there's so many reasons that you might be alone at home and not able, and you're desperate to have that hand that's reaching out to you. And storytelling is such a vital and vibrant and wonderful way to do that. And I think that the stories that we're telling online are different to the ones that we're telling maybe with live. There's a very different energy about it. It's a different thing, and I think we should embrace that, rather than just seeing it as a poor second choice. It's not instead of, it can be as well as, hopefully one day, and it's a different thing.
Say, Amy, you haven't told a news story for a little while, and then you tell a news story. I don't know about you, but I always think like, oh, that went terribly. But actually, it didn't go terribly. What happened was I had forgotten what it feels like to tell a story that I wasn't very familiar with. I'd just completely forgotten, because it'd been so long, and I'd just been relying on stories I already knew, which I was comfortable with. And suddenly I felt uncomfortable, because I wasn't quite sure how it was going to play, and how, you know, what bits to linger on, what bits to edit, and so forth and so forth. And I think the same thing's happening to me with Zoom, which is, I think, no. And actually, it's just a new medium, and I'm imposing the expectations of a live show onto the Zoom experience, and expecting it to be the same as if I was in a room with people, and it isn't. And that sense of dislocation, that sense of, oh, I'm disappointed because it wasn't what it was like when I was in the Borough Theatre, Abergavenny. That's something I'm wrestling with. I have to convince myself, don't expect it to be like that. It's going to be something else. And the more often I do it, the more I realize what its potential might be. I do struggle with two things, though, with Zoom. one is straight after the show. Normally, you get time to decompress. You're lucky you go to the bar and have a chat with the audience. And then you get in your car and you drive home. And all that's decompression time. On Zoom, you turn it off and you go downstairs and do the washing up. And there's absolutely no decompression time in your body. It's full of adrenaline, performance adrenaline, and you're just in the house. There's that. I struggle with that. And the second thing I struggle with is making any flipping money out of it.
Do you know what? You've just given me the perfect into the things that I need to say to wrap this off. Because sadly, it's getting to that time, and there's been loads of great comments on the thing. I mean, so Caroline Frey is talking about Cat Weatherall, and it's she did blast the last blast, September blast, and so Caroline says she disappeared underwater on screen when she was performing a while back. She really used the screen space, and others just lean forward and look into your eyes, which is equally exciting in a different way. And I have to say, Cat Weatherall was amazing. I mean, she kind of was off on the screen, not screen. I mean, and it was real playing with that space. But one thing that I want to ask everybody is, I think I was talking to a friend Fleur the other day, and she's going, "Oh, is it Amy Week coming up? It's another Amy Week." And I'm afraid it is this week.
It is Amy Week. Yeah, it really is Amy Week.
You can't get rid of me. I'm on every well, not quite every night. But obviously we're here tonight. And thank you very much to GetAword and Edgeways, because I'm using their Zoom here, there, and everywhere. I'm being completely extravagant with their Zoom account, which they let me use, so thank you very much. And it is GetAword in Edgeways on Thursday night, which is a spoken word concert, and go and have a look at the Facebook page or my website, and or message me, and I'll very happily tell you about that. We've got an amazing storyteller, Janice Del Negro, who is going to do a collaboration with Catherine Suter-Caddick, who a lot of you will know from the Folk Tales, the History Press Folktale series. So I haven't had a go at having a visual artist and doing drawing to storytelling, and we're going to see how that works. We've also got Fishmonger Stories and Gareth Owen, who we were talking about Poetry Please before. He used to present Poetry Please.
I remember him on Poetry Please. I remember him on Poetry Please, yeah. So
having him on Thursday. Friday is Blast, and we have the marvellous, as you've seen on the chat, Casper Sørensen and Fred Versonnen, and also Kestrel Morten. So I start a new series. This is one of the other great things about being online and storytelling online is, for Blast, I live in a tiny little town on the Welsh borders. I could not ever afford to have Fred and Casper, or either one of them. I mean, just have one of them here would be quite an accomplishment. To have two, couldn't do it. And I also can't usually have floor spots or help people, encourage people and do new voices, because it's too far for people to come. And now we've got a platform so we can hear people from all over the world.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I've set up a green room so that when we say goodbye to everybody else, I'm sorry, you're not invited. We're going to go off and have a glass of wine and a natter. But I think this whole thing about Zoom decompression is really important. And I would love to know what people think about that, and whether I should set up just a Zoom meeting room, because obviously most events I do are webinars, so you can talk on the chat but you can't see each other. If people would be interested in having like a Zoom bar set up, where it's just a meeting room, you can go in and you can chat and do whatever you like and just sort of say hello to everybody, have a little bit of time chatting, and then just go off in your own time, if people would like to do that. So have a think about that and let me know. I think this is YFOS. Who is YFOS? Are they somebody in Australia, Caroline? How about that cake competition bake-off? That's happening on Friday. Yes, you need to make salted chocolate cake for Friday. We don't need to. It'd be fun if you did. Bring your cake. We're going to have a cake parade on Friday. So yes. And the other thing is about money that you brought up. And it's really hard to make money at the moment. And taking the tradition on, I was really was fantastic. I was able to do it weekly before because it's part of my Arts Council bid, and that was absolutely fantastic. Having the time to do that and the time to make a couple of podcasts, not very many because this kind of took over. I was only able to do that because I was arts funded, but I love doing it. But it's ended up so I had to take over most of my working week. So this is terribly non-British, but I have set up a Patreon page, which is launching now tonight. So I'll put I'm going to put that on my Facebook page after this, and I'm going to stick it up in the chat as well. And people are asking how they can donate to you, Daniel. How can they pay to come and hear you to have stories? Have you got a Patreon page? Can people give you money?
Blimey. Well, is there any way they could like give to you and say it's for Daniel?
Probably, yes. Have you got a PayPal Me account?
Yeah, I have got a PayPal Me account, and it's my email address, which is herla32@aol.com. herla32@aol.com.
So I will put these up on my website. I'm not very good at that. I'm gonna copy my Patreon page. This is one of those things. It's if you are in a place where you can put a little bit of money in every month. I'd also really like your ideas and opinions and suggestions, not just money. You know, kind of. I'm interested in having that conversation. So I've lost the chat now. My chat's vanished. Do you know what? I think I've ended up on YouTube. I was doing so well on the technical front.
I think you're flipping Bill Gates.
Hang on. I've lost the chat though. Here's the chat. No, it does not want to play. Dum-de-dum. I've got Q&A. I've got participants. Who's stolen my chat? I don't know. There you go. I can't put it on the chat, and I'm trying to read what people have said to me. I don't know what's going on. And this is a conversation I think we're going to carry on. Sort of generally. I've got the chat back. Hoorah. And there we go. We've got your email for the PayPal, which is completely marvellous. I'm also going to say I totally recommend Daniel's books. Daniel's got loads of books out. And one of the things that we didn't talk about tonight that we were going to talk about was Dark Tales from the Woods, which is a fantastic, fantastic book. But it's not the only one that you've got out. So, you know, that's a really great way of supporting artists, and you get something really, really lovely. Go and buy a book. So yeah, everybody's agreeing. What an awesome book!
Thanks, folks. Thanks a lot, folks.
So I'm
proud of the books. I'm proud of the books.
Well, I think you should be. Yeah, Virtual Hat PayPal is another thing. People sharing email. The intimacy of a Zoom storyteller reaches right back for me to the first listening stories in childhood, but it is lonely afterwards, so maybe a green room would help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to set up a green room for both After Get the Words and Edgeways and for Blast this week. I'm going to see what I can do for that. If I don't manage it, I have tried, and it might be next month that I can get it all sorted out, but I will do my best. For now, as usual, I've overrun because I just choose really exciting and interesting people to talk to. Next month, I am going to be looking at the law and landscape of Ireland. That's where we're going to be going to. And I will announce, if you haven't already guessed, who the amazing storyteller that we have next month is. And if you can't figure it out, it's on my Patreon page. So there. But for now, I just want you to give a massive round of applause. You can put thunder applause and clapping on the clap. But hurrah, Daniel, we think you're fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom and bits of stories and spending an hour chatting to us. It's been brilliant. And thank you all for coming and joining us and listening, and for all of your thoughts and comments. Now, obviously, Daniel hasn't got to read all of this yet. So I will be sending the chat to him. So even if we've not talked about your comments, we're going to have another look through, and Daniel will see all the lovely things that you have said to him. So don't worry. But for now, take a moment to be with everybody before I cut you off. And I'm sorry, I'm sending you back into your own rooms. But why don't you get a glass of wine or a cup of tea or a bit of water? And even if it is raining where you are, just go outside for a moment and look up, because the one thing that we all share is the same sky and the same planet and the same world, and we are all here together. So just take a minute to raise a glass or a cup of tea to us and be with us, and then go back to your own lives. So good night. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, and see you here next month for Taking the Tradition On.